All right, welcome back. We are WEBD6201 in the winter 2021 semester, and it is week 11, part 2 of our broadcast. And we're talking today about how to use what we had before and to create full CRUD. All right, so remember, full CRUD is read, create, read, update, delete. And without further ado, let's go back to our project. So I put the video up on YouTube already, and this is what it looks like. So last time we had a couple of issues with TypeScript, and before we start, I wanted to talk about how I've updated to the project outside of class just to make sure that things are good. So what I've done is I've got I've used import statements here. So import and then the name of the package, from, and this kind of stuff for every package. That's one thing you do, first thing. I also found that when I did something like this, import star as whatever the name of the object was, so example, index router, from whatever the package, file I'm getting, that works pretty good because what this is a wild star that basically says get everything from index router. But the thing with index router is the way we did the routing, and if I go back to index for a second, notice that it's the same. So I said import express. We can say import express from express. That's totally fine to do. Something like this, right? And I'm going to go Control-Shift-B. Again, I'm just launching my watch task on this thing. The other thing I noticed when I did the watch task is I got these errors in my node modules. And the errors in the node modules actually come from Mongoose, the Mongoose types. Why? Because it's already there in the Mongoose module. So this is the one module that includes type hinting. I don't know why they did that separate, but they include type hinting in the actual package itself, which means like down in Mongoose itself, it has type hinting, an index.d.ts file, which is a declaration file. So you really don't need the Mongoose type hinting file separately. So let's remove that. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to kind of stop the watch task. So there we go. Let's get rid of this terminal. I got Mongo also running in a terminal, but let's do a couple things. So I'm going to go into just some housekeeping. So one thing I've got is let's go into my package.json. Welcome, Andre. And I want to remove that dev dependency. So if you look at the dev dependency right here for Mongoose, that's what's causing me to have problems with my node modules. Let's get rid of it. So yarn remove, and then it's @types/mongoose, and then ---- dev, right, which will remove the dev dependency for Mongoose and remove our error that we had here in node modules, as you can see. So that was kind of the place we're getting the error, and now that's fixed. So that's good. And again, I've got Mongo running in a terminal, and I've got my command prompt running here. In order for me to have Mongo running in a terminal, I also have the Mongodb server running in a separate command shell. So make sure you have that running as well while you're doing this. Okay, so that's important to do. It's actually mandatory. It won't work otherwise. So I've kind of transpiled, right? So, and I want to do it again. So I want to say Control-Shift-B. I want to choose the watch task, and the watch task will transpile all my modules and everything else properly, and now I have 0 errors, and this is a good thing. Let's add a, let's go back to the command prompt there. I'm going to need to use that in a second. But notice what I did was I said import whatever the module name is that I want locally. That's the alias, like it says, from, and then the module name. So no more requires like that, right? Same thing we can do with the contact model now. So now that I've got import contact model require, I can do the same thing. I can say import star. Let's try this. Import star as contact model from. So we can do that from piece right there, from this area here. And then what we're going to do is when I look at the contact model now, I'm getting full code hinting where before I didn't. So that's kind of something that I wanted to do. Okay, so that is looking good. that is how we do it. And then so when we export the router, but we export router from the module, right? So when we click the export button here, when I actually put if I put the export keyword in here, I don't have a class that I'm creating. I haven't and I could later on create like kind of a routing class where I could export my router separately, and if I want to. For now, we're not going to do that. We're going to go with this functional based style of programming, but I could, if I really wanted to, now, especially with TypeScript, create a class that works great because it's supported in Node.js. And then the class itself would be surrounded by an IFI and so on, and all those kind of wonderful things that we were doing in our front end. But what this does is it means I don't really need module exports anymore, because what's happening is that in my when I transpile, right, it's creating everything for me. So in my index.js, what it's gone and done is it's created a bunch of import statements. So these are like little shims, if you will, that are made specifically for Node, right? That's what TypeScript does. And it creates this bit of code here. And what it does is it makes it so that I can do the exports.router and also import different things as well. So we're all good now when we did this. Okay. So again, don't worry about this part. These shims, and that's what they are: create binding, set module default, import star. Import star is import star as that whole module pattern. It works great for this. So that's what it does with the index router. So it's a little bit more complex on the JS side, but who cares? We're working with a beautiful TypeScript side. And same thing goes with my app.ts now. So app.ts, I'm saying import star as index router from whatever, the path, right? And then on the app.js side, we have all these shims again. Okay, so that's kind of something that's happening now. All right, so that is the way we do it. And this is nice. And then if I go to my server.ts now, one thing is when I go import star as app from ./app, then what ends up happening is I need to do this thing that says app.app. Why is this required? And by the way, in my app.ts, if I was to use my my router, index router, I can't just go index router by itself. I have to do, when I include that as my configuration, index router down here, where I say app.use now on line 35, I can't just go index router. It's got to be index router.router, because router is an object the object that I'm exporting. So this is the difference between when we use the export keyword as opposed to module.exports. Okay, so that's the difference there. We have to actually point out the object that we're exporting, and then because we're exporting our index.ts, we're exporting router. So if I go, notice export router, that object, which is an accumulation of all the routes that I have here, we add all the routes we kind of create per router, or create or instantiate a router that includes all these routes, right? When we create our server, that object is passed back to the app.ts file, and the only thing we have is the router object. All right, so now we can see the code hinting that comes from there, but index router is the container, router is the object that we're exporting. So that's why we have to do it this way now. Okay, so that's the one change I made. By the way, all these changes are up on GitHub. The change I just made, I'm going to put up in a second. But that is how it works. Same thing with db-config. So if I go back to config, and again, I'm just looking at this db.ts, I'm doing export this stuff, right? Well, back inside of my my app.ts, then instead of saying, I don't have to use requires anymore, right? I can just say import star as db-config, and then I can say from that particular path, that particular path, I can get rid of this part. And then what this does is it does the same thing. So I say, hey, db-config is cool, but db-config has a path, right? I can see that. And it also has a secret. I'm not using that secret right now. So far, so good. We got rid of the require keywords here. And we can get rid of it here. So create error, again, import create error. We can say from HTTP errors. We can get rid of all the it requires. And this is what we want to do because we want to move to a more reasonable state. How about this one? And how about this one? Again, let HTTP require. We wouldn't do that. We would say import import HTTP from. Now we got to be careful here because it could have side effects, and we'll see in a second, right? And where we can see instantly we've got an error on the right, it looks like app is right here, import app, right? And like we did app.app here, right? We have to do our create server app.app there. And that doesn't really bode well. I don't like that. So really what this is our app config, right? Our application config, right? Or we can call it config, whatever you like to call it, because that's what it is, right? So let's just rename this part. So we'll just go rename symbol. This is just in the server.ts, just to make this clear, so it's not app.app, right? So we'll call this app config, right? Our app configuration, we're importing from our app.ts file. That's what that is. And we're saying, let's create a server with our app configuration.app, which is the object that we're exporting. And that's what it would be. So that's how this looks. And it'll be the same thing for here. So far, so good. We don't have any other errors anywhere else, but we do have a couple of requires left. All right. And the require that we have is here in debug, right? And we had one in HTTP. So how would we get rid of this one? Because what's happening is for us to do debug, we're actually calling debug and passing in this object, right? That's what this is, kind of doing it in one pass, if you will. So that's why it's showing in an any, right? So if I require debug as an example, then what I would have to do is call debug afterwards. So if I was to do it in 2 lines, right? So let's just cut this for a second. I would do an import, and then I would, instead of require, I would say from, right? Just like we've done before. There's that from pattern, right? So that's one part, but then I would have to use it right away. So I have to debug dot, and then what we want to do is, it's almost like we want to call debug. So it's almost like I want to do this. So it's like I'm calling it and I'm passing in the namespace that I want. And that's what's happening. It's just in 2 lines instead of 1. Otherwise, the entire thing is the exact same. There's no errors here that we can see. Let's run it now and see if we got errors when we run nodemon. Because that's real tests, right? So let's do it. So nodemon. And if we have an error, it'll come up, right? So far we're good. Let's run this in the on a screen here. So localhost. And we can see that this is all running as expected, okay? Just like before. So what do we do? Why did we do all that? Because again, we want to modernize. We want to get rid of all the requires. The requires are kind of old school now when it comes to Node, right? Can we still use them? Are they still being used in the back end? Absolutely. Look, right here. This is where the require pattern is in here, right? It's looking like it's using require anyway. But instead of using require, what we're doing instead is we're using a shim or a wrapper that wraps around our, the requires, and allows us to use a modern way of accessing Node with TypeScript, which is the much easier way to do it. Again, we get good code hinting, which is what we want. Code hinting for us equals to code tooling, and that gives us good support when it comes to any errors that might occur, which we're going to see later on today. Okay, so that's the thing we've been doing. So we've got a lot of really good things going on. Let's put this up on GitHub so we can have everything up. So these are all the changes that I've made so that it works with TypeScript now. So again, we say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say removed all requires. So we'll say replaced all requires. Replaced all requires with TypeScript syntax. Okay, so that's what we did. Git push. All right, so that is everything we've done up to date. It updates it. We also removed our Mongoose code ending package because it's included in the Mongoose npm package, which is pretty cool. All right, so this is good, but now we want to do full CRUD, and we've got partial routing happening, right? One thing to note is that this router that we have here in our index.js, right, as an example, the biggest problem that we have with it is right now is that, well, we're doing everything at once. We're doing, you know, your all your main kind of routes, as well as we're doing the all these temporary routes here. So let's add, I'm just gonna add some bunch of these asterisks. And I'm doing this because I want to say this is definitely temporary. We're going to move this into its own file next week, okay? Because this doesn't make any sense. All right, so that's what this area is. We're mocking up login and register or authentication and contact list related pages right now. And right now we're getting our contact list, right? But our contact list is being rendered as JSON a JSON object. Let's see how that looks. So if I go back out to contact list, so if I just do that, contact dash list, I'm going to get this. I'm going to get JSON right now, right? And what this is actually reading the database. So how did that work? Remember, we went to this contact.find. Contact is actually a model. That's what we got that we created. We're getting code hinting now for this, right? And what we can do for the contact is this is like, it's like us doing a db.contacts.find. That's what it's like, okay? So Mongoose is allowing us to use very similar syntax, but instead of doing a res.json down here, I want to do a res render. I want to res render or draw the page. So how is that going to look for us? Because that's the thing we need to get done now. So what I want to do then is I want to pass in this information here. So this is the stuff that I want, right? And let's grab this and put that in place here, right? But the one thing I'm missing is how do I pass my contacts? So this is my contacts, the actual database of contacts. I want to pass this to the page, right? So far I have title and page, and I've got a display name. That's my temp display name. And I want to pass in my contacts. So I'm going to say contacts, which are going to be contacts. Okay, so that's what it's going to be. But in order for me to support this functionality, I have to modify my my view. So if I go back to my views, and if I go back to my content and go to my contact list.ejs, this isn't really conducive to me, doing what I need to do, right? What I need to do is change this, right? So I can have my functionality. And the way it's going to work is I'm going to use EJS to help me. So what I mean is I need to do a for loop in here, right? Similar to what we've done before, all right? So before, and I'm just going to point this out to you so you can see it. Let's look inside of our client side. And if you look in the client side area under scripts, you can easily see that on the app.ts side, we have a bunch of extra information here we're going to get rid of. So we don't need any of this. We did it last time, but again, I've updated the project, so it's back. So I'm just going to get rid of all the stuff we don't need, right? All this stuff. Remember, we're using a project that works now on our up online. So this is kind of our testing. Everything is good here. Here's our display contact. Nice, nice, nice. And display contact list is here with AuthGuard. We don't need any of this anymore. I'm not going to use my contact list the way we've been using it. In fact, what I want to do is I want to get to my contact list directly, but I've got this part, right? So this is the part that I want to use. And notice I have a for loop here, but it's a for each. I can't use a for each. I'm going to use a regular for loop inside of my contact list.ejs here. And so let's start that code. It's going to be %for, and let's do a let count. We'll call it count. In this case, equals to 0. So we'll start off as 0, just like normal for loops. where count is less than, we know we're going to pass into our contact list, which is our contacts. That's where we're passing in. Contacts is the object that we're passing in to this document through our index router, right? We'll come back to this in a second. Contacts dot length, because contacts is an array, and then we're going to say count plus plus. And then we're going to kind of close it off. This is how we're doing EJS. And just for good practice, we're going to do the same thing on this side. We'll just kind of close off the loop this way. So this is how we do EJS looping. We kind of create the for loop here with this syntax, the beginning and end brackets, and the same thing over here. And anything we put in the middle gets looped, gets repeated, and gets created in real time. All right, so that's what we want to put in here. We want to put all the details, that same stuff we had before. We want to put it in here from our app.ts, this stuff, right? So let's just lift it from here. So I'm going to copy this part right here from our app.ts inside of our display contact list function. I'm going to copy that part. I'm going to go back to my my contact list.ejs file, and we're going to paste that in as actual HTML now. Well, not really HTML, because we're going to formulate this as HTML. And what I mean by that is, remember that EJS we're using a template engine to create the HTML in real time. So this is what we need here. This is our for loop, but we don't normally have an index anymore. So and this index, we're not going to inject it this way. We can't inject it this way. We can't use template strings, but we can use EJS. Let's just undo that so it doesn't mess up. We can use EJS, and that looks like this. % equals to count. And remember that when we count down, we don't want to start at 0, right? We can say count plus 1 if you want to. Count plus 1 is not going to modify anything. It's not going to take us out of scope, but it's going to start our counter at 1 as opposed to 0, because 0 doesn't make any sense, right? So contact.fullname, we can't use this anymore, but we like this idea, and it's going to be, let's replace this starting part. So % like so, right? And we're going to say % equals. And so we're going to replace all open curly braces here with % equals. Let's do that. So just really quickly, let's just replace those first. And anything that's closing a closing brace with just % greater than, right? So like that's what we're going to do that. Just going to give them some space there so I can get the syntax right. Because we're using EJS now to inject the contact as opposed to this. This key isn't going to be the same anymore. We're just going to make this for now. The value doesn't really matter anymore, so let's get rid of the value altogether. So no more values. So we're going to fix this up in a second. And this can't be contact because there is no contact. It's going to be contacts. And it's going to be contacts and then count, right? Because it's going to be an array of contacts. So contacts count. That's how we would do it in the array anyway, and that's what we're doing here. So that's the difference. So now what this is going to do is it's going to run through each of the contacts that I send in here, and I'm sending the contacts object into the EJS file, contactlist.ejs, through my index router. So the index router says, okay, so find all the contacts which we found. Last time we kind of sent that just to the screen as JSON. Now we're not doing that. We're res rendering. We're using our index template. We're passing in the title of this contact list and a page name, this contact list, so we can use it on the app.ts side and on our client side for any kind of code hinting or validation if we want to. And then we're passing in the contacts. This is the contacts object right here. We're just calling it contacts, and we're passing in contacts, which is the document. So this is the document that we're passing into this. It's the same name, but don't be confused. I'm just using the same name so that when we go into our EJS file, then we know what it means. Okay, so contacts. Display name is just, mock-up right now just to say that we're logged in. Okay, so that's that part. So that's how we're doing it. So contacts, the actual contacts object gets passed into EJS. So that's why I can use it here. Okay, and that's what's happening. And that'll give us the ability to show everything. But edit, delete, and even add, the add button, none of that's going to work anymore because we're not going to be using our front end anymore for any of that stuff. So let's go back to our front end just for a second. And let's comment out everything except for AuthGuard. So all this stuff, we can comment all that out right now because we don't need it anymore. So I'm going to go to Edit, and we're going to go to Toggle Block Comments. Okay. Which is pretty good. And so all we have is the AuthGuard, and AuthGuard is going to make sure that we're not going to be able to go there. The mockup, login, and register pages are going to allow us to skip through this and redirect us back to our login page. That's what this does. So let's save that. So no more front-end control of our contact list. It's going to be only back-end. That means no more using local storage. We're going to be using our database, which is where we want to go anyway. Okay, so going back to our page now, I'm going to go back to my contact list.ejs. This button here, it can't be a button anymore. What I want it to be instead is an anchor tag. Why? Because what we can do with it is we can redirect ourselves. So we can say, we can have a new href, which is going to be /add. So we're going to add new objects to the list. That's where we're going to have our creation. We're not going to code that yet, but we're going to put the link in there for now, right? And it'll error out if we try to use it. Same thing goes down here with our buttons. Instead of them being buttons, let's change these from buttons to anchor tags. And the reason why is first of all, they'll still look the same, but we'll be able to put an href in here without using any back end. So I can say href is equal to, and then we can put in what it's going to look like. So for now, it's going to go to the edit, my edit route, right? And the same thing goes with this one. This is going to go href, and this is going to go to the delete route, right? So that's what it's going to do. But there is no delete route and there is no edit route right now, and we need to modify these. In fact, what this is really going to look like, remember, we're going to use a different pattern for this. We're going to use edit, and we're going to edit the ID. So instead of sending the ID back to the front end, we're going to do it here on the back end. And the way to do that is we're going to say, I want to edit, and I want to pass in like an ID. That's how it's going to look like, right? So what is the ID going to be? It's going to be the contacts count ID that I'm going to pass forward. So it's going to be so percent equals, so this is new, contacts, right, count, right, and then I want to put in _, ID, right? So why is that? Why am I doing this? Because this ID is going to identify which contact I want to edit. I'm going to edit. Now I don't have a route for this yet, but I'm going to make one. So this is going to be something like where I display the object I want to edit in the edit page. All right, so I need to make a route for this. So you can see that there's stuff that's missing. Similarly, I want to delete the object that has an ID of this. I'm going to search for this ID in the database, and then I'm going to delete that object. So again, same thing here. So I'm going to kind of do, oops, I'm going to just grab all this as to finish off the link. And this is what it's going to look like. So I'm going to both edit and delete in a very similar way, if that makes sense to you. Okay. And these are good things, right? These are two good things. So save. And let's see what this looks like. Can I actually see this now live? Right? What does this thing look like when I kind of go through? I should loop through and load all of my contacts in here, or so I think. Let's see how this works. So going back to this, if I refresh, then it takes me back to my login page. Yay, that worked. Let's log in. So we're going to mock login. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There is no real login right now. And when we go there, we got this error. We got this error because we have an error, and this is actually trying to do an error. It's trying to transpile, but it says display names not found because, remember, this version of our code, our error page is going to the error header, and there is no display name. And what that means is there's a bit of a bug in our code inside of our app.ts. In our app.ts at the bottom, when we go to error, we have our title and page, but there's no display name. So let's add that in. So we'll say display name that's going to be equal to nothing because we're not logged in necessarily if we have an error, right? And if I go back to that now, and if I refresh, we should have this, which says, here's an error, as an example with our main content, right? My container, and it's kind of driving this include stuff, and it doesn't understand what to do. So why is that, right? And what errors are we getting in the page to generate this? If I go to the console, no errors here in the console, but it says context is not defined. Context is not defined, right? So that's what's happening. So I'm trying to pass in context, right? But context doesn't exist right now, and it's giving me a bit of an error. And you can see what it's going to look like on the front end, or the part of the back end. Let's kind of pull this up and go to NodeMon. NodeMon is going to give us all those errors, giving us an error for logging in. Okay, what's happening in our login page? Let's go back to that route. So again, I'm going back to the index.ts route. I'm going to the login page, right? And when I log in, it says render the page. Oh man, I can't do this. When I log in, I want to redirect. That's what I want to do. So for now, this is not real, right? But when I do a final login, so when I do a post, this displays the login page, okay? But when I process the login page, I can't just print out the page, right? That doesn't make any sense. Instead, what I need to do is for now a res.redirect. And I need to redirect to contact list. Okay, that's what I need to do. Why? Because my contact list does all the stuff for me, right? If you notice, right? Contact list goes here, it finds the contact, and it dumps in the contacts in there. This is what I want to do. All right, so that's safe. Let's go back out to the page and refresh, and we're good. We're golden. And this data is no longer coming from our application. Notice our application localhost storage is different than this stuff because this is just mock data that we had in our application, and this part is actual data in our database. Okay, that's the difference. So, all right, so that's how it works. Okay, how do we start MongoDB? Sorry. So Nicholas asked how we're starting MongoDB. We have to start MongoDB again. Nicholas, remember, and you'll see this in a second. We do a Mongodb. Mongodb starts off the server. That's how we do it. Okay. So we can get rid of this because this is garbage anyway. This is just mock data. So we're going to get rid of this from local storage. So no more local storage. That's gone. And eventually we're going to get rid of session storage too. Local session storage is keeping our user just as a mock-up to make sure that this all works. And so we built pages over the course of the semester, right, to make sure that this works. And now it's working. However, we don't have any of this working. And this is part of our create, read, update, delete, update that we're doing today. Okay. So again, if I click on this, it's going to give me an error. There is no add page, edit. It goes to the edit page, but it gives me an error 404. So it doesn't do some right stuff. And in fact, it not only does an error 404, but also gives me a bunch of these errors, right? Bootstrap and other errors. That's weird, isn't it? Right? And delete also doesn't really work. It also gives me a bunch of these errors too. Notice that we're actually getting the path. This is the actual ID that we're reading from the database, and we're pushing it onto the URL, and that's okay, right? That's how we're getting from one page to the other, and we're specifically editing one thing or deleting one thing. But our issues, the reason why we're getting that weird lack of CSS has nothing to do with our pathing. It has to do with the fact that when I go into edit, edit, I'm in a sub kind of like a sublink of the edit, and then what it's trying to do is going to say, look, I want to go to edit and I want to get Bootstrap from edit. Well, Bootstrap doesn't belong to edit. Bootstrap is actually in our local host. So the pathing is all wrong. And this is what this error is showing us. Let's fix this problem first before we go on. So the reason why the pathing is wrong is because in our index.ejs, we're using /bootstrap. We can't use / anymore. Remember that Bootstrap is in the is part of node modules, and node modules is on the path, right? So we can just get rid of the dot. Okay. Same thing down here. So why would we do this? Well, when we go back to try it again, if I go to edit now, right, and if I refresh, it's still giving me these edit Bootstrap stuff. And let's make sure that we refresh the page, right? Because how it should work is there should be nothing that's going to edit content or jQuery or any of that stuff, right? This all should be on our page, right? Error.ejs also has the same problem, so we need to fix this problem on our error page. So we have an error page, and it's a 404 error. We don't have that, so we got to get rid of those things too. Okay. And now we're good. We got this, but we don't have those ugly errors anymore. Because it really is an error, a 404 problem, right? We can't do this because it's a 404 problem. We don't have those pages. We don't have these pages. But now it's not erroring out anymore. We're not getting those weird CSS problems because they're all linked properly. Okay, that's great. So we're ready to go, and we've done our list. So this is our read. We've finally done that part. Let's put that up on GitHub for you. So again, we're going to go to our command prompt, and we're going to say git add dot, git commit -m, and we're going to say added read capability on contact list. Because that's what it is, read. Okay, reading, that's part of the CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. We're just reading. So we're able to read from the database. Now what we want to do is update, delete, we want to add. All right. Let's do the edit first, the update, and then adding will be easy afterwards. It's kind of backwards, but it makes sense. And you'll see in a second why. All right, so let's go back into our router and see how that's going to be done. Well, remember, we only have two little links, a contact list link and a logout link. A logout link really doesn't belong here. We said that before. This is kind of our logout page shouldn't even be here. It's temporary for sure, but anything log in or log out or anything like that, register, that should be kind of an authentication area. And so I'll kind of put in, again, these are temporary routes. So temporary routes for authentication and registration, right? That's what those are. And we'll just put in a couple more asterisks, which is going to create that weird thing for a second. All right, so I'm just spacing out our routers. So I'm going to specify when we need to change stuff later, right? Because this is going to make it so that we can at least see it here inside of the map. And we can say that this is temporary routes for our contact list related pages. That's what this is. So this is temporary routes. These are temporary routes for authentication and registration. They're not real, right? And we need to add more in here for contact list. This shouldn't say register page, it should be the contact list page. Contact list page with contact list. That's what this does. So I want to do the same thing with the contact list, but I want to do a router.get. I want to see the pages for add and edit. Okay, I'm just going to grab any link, doesn't matter which one. So we'll grab this one and we'll copy it. Oops. I meant to put that, so log out, sorry, I meant to grab that. Let's say log out too. Log out Let's make sure we have everything. This is registered. Good. And I'm just going to grab this link again and put it down here. All right, so now this link would be for, let's do all of them. So we'll say I want to make a page for the edit. So this is my edit page. This is to display the edit page. But the edit page, in order for me to display it, I need to pass in the ID. So this kind of pattern, where the ID that I pass in that's after edit, this thing that I've written here is something that I can get from my parameters, right? So that's one thing I'm looking at. So this is the edit page. Edit ID page, right? Okay, so this is display. And then what I want to do is, so this is going to go to edit. It's going to say edit here in my title. My page is going to be edit. My display name is going to be nothing. I don't have a display name. But I want to pass in the information in here. And so this is incomplete, this piece here, okay? Let's do the next one. So not only do I want to display, but I also want to process. I want to process my edit page, right? So this will be a post request that I'm going to do, a post request. So get request, displays, post request, process, okay? Again, we're going to modify this link. There is no link for this. In fact, the post request will not do a res render. It's actually just going to do a res.redirect when it's complete. So it's going to res.redirect, right, back to the contact list. That's what it's going to do. All right. When it's done, it's going to do this. Okay. So that's the process the edit page. Well, I want to do something similar to the add page. So I'm going to grab both those two links. And then we're going to have the add page pages here. So again, it's going to be add, but there's not going to be an ID with adding. We're just going to add a new object, right? So this is going to be the add page with, when you go there with add, we know that the title is going to be add and the page is going to be edit. We're going to use the same edit page to add, right? We're going to reuse the page. We don't have a separate add page or edit page. We only have one edit.ejs content link. This is it right here. We're going to use it for the same thing. Adding and editing is going to be using the same document because it's almost identical, right? All right, the other thing is when we process our add page, when we do our add page, then again, we want to redirect back to the contact list. This is the same, this part. Okay. The processing isn't this. There's other things we have to do, but what this looks like is similar. And finally, we want to be able to process our delete page, but it's going to be a get request, not a post request. We're going to use this pattern right here. So down at the bottom. So we're going to say that this is going to process the delete ID page. Delete whatever the ID is going to be, right? And this will be delete. We're going to delete the ID. The title is going to be delete, or we're never going to use it though. You're going to see that in a second. There's no delete page necessarily, right? And then in the page, it's going to be the delete page. Okay, that's what's going to happen. But we're not actually going to do any deletion page. We're just going to res redirect when we're done. We're going to do that. We're going to perform the delete, and we're going to res redirect back to the contact list again. So there's no page that's going to render because it's just going to delete stuff. If this makes sense. So how do we do it? How do we do the rest of this? Right? For example, how do we? Well, first of all, we have to make some modifications to my page. So let's go into that edit.ejs page, right? And we got to think about some modifications to make in here, right? Because this isn't correct anymore, right? It was correct, but we know that edit, we're not going to do any backend, any front end stuff anymore. It's all going to be backend, which means we can't say edit contact. We're going to say that we want to pass in the title here that we're going to say. So it'll be add or edit contact, depending on what it's going to be, right? Add or edit. So this is the edit.ejs page we're working on right now. But we have to modify it because that's how this is going to work, right? Next, what we need to do is we're going to add a value when we edit. We're going to say when we put a value is actually going to inject content in here on each of the links. We're going to say that percent equals, and we're going to go. We're going to pass in some data. We're going to call it data here. Data dot full name, right, is going to be passed in here, whatever the data is, and this is our contact data. So let's call it, instead of data, let's call it contact, because the contact.fullname is going to be something that goes in here, right? Notice there's no for loop. We're just going to pass in the contact data. We haven't done that yet, okay? But this is what we need. So we're going to grab this same pattern right before the required, and we're going to put it in every step. So we're going to say we also want to push in the contact number. So this will be contact number. Okay, and the same thing goes with the last part, which is the email address. Again, all we're doing is we're injecting, using EJS for injecting data inside of the template page. That's what we're doing here. So full name, contact number, email address. That's what's going in there. Okay, so that's what's happening. Down in here, this is where some changes are going to occur. These are going to become buttons. These are going to become, instead of, kind of the edit button as an example, and buttons they can stay as. I don't mind the buttons being here, but one thing that we have to change up here in the form, we've got to change the form so that it uses a post method now. So form is going to be of type post. And why is that? Because we're actually going to use the form. We're going to process the form. Whenever we do a post request, the post request is going to issue a post request to my server, the server we just made, with all the data that we have here. And the data that's going to come to the server is going to be anything that has name. So name, full name, that is the variable that's going to be in the request body. Notice full name, contact number, and email address. They're lowercase, right? Because that's the way we had done it for JavaScript. But to make it easier, right, we're going to change them so that they're all uppercase so that they match with our schema. So let's change these. Okay. Again, I could have kept them there and I could have had it all lowercase, but it's going to look confusing in the index now. Because we have uppercase, let's stick with one thing. Our ID could be lowercase, that's okay, right? But our actual name, the name object, the name property of each element, that actually is the variable that's going to be represented in the request body. Okay, so that's why we need to make it so we don't have to, but we're matching it up with what our contact's going to be. What about down here? So now that we have these two buttons, well, the buttons are going to be almost identical, right? And they're going to do a submit request. That's what they're going to do. They're going to submit. When I click the button for edit, it's actually going to post my data that I have in my form to the server. So I need to keep it as a button, but I need to make the type submit. And instead of making the cancel button a button, I'm going to change it to an anchor tag. Just going to separate some stuff here for a second. And I'm going to choose an href tag of /contact list. So in other words, when we press cancel, we're just going to go to the contact list. There is no click event that's going to trigger anymore for edit. One thing we need to do also in our edit page is change the button that's in here, because it's going to not be edit all the time. So we're going to do an if statement for that. We're going to say that %if my title is equal to edit, oops, well, that's a good thing. That means that we're in the edit page. Remember, I want to put these things in here. We only want to start off with this, right? So we want to kind of close off the brace that's here, and we're going to say, but else, what if it's not edit? It's an add. or we don't get the proper information, let's close off that brace, right? Else, we're going to produce a different button. So in other words, the only time that it's going to render the button or inject this button is when it's the edit page. Otherwise, we're going to create a new button, another button. And this button, the original one, is not going to render anymore. Instead of the edit button, we're going to make an add button. And the add button is still going to be of type submit. It's still going to be a button primary, but instead of the FA edit, we're just going to use that other one, which is FA plus dash circle. All right, and we're going to change the name of the button to say add. And let's just, so this is edit, this is add, this is cancel, and I think this is pretty good. So this is what it's going to look like now. This is the full form itself. So again, all we've done is we've converted the form so it works with the back end now instead of the front end. So remember, when I say front, I mean our app.ts in the scripts folder in our client file, we've been working with all semester. We're not going to use that anymore. We're going to use the back end to do all our control for us and our routing. All right, cool. So this is really good. This is excellent. And now that we have this mechanism, we need to pass in a contact to this form. Okay, let's go back to our router and get that done. So I'm going to go back to index.ts, and I have my edit page. Let's complete the edit page and see what that looks like. All right. So how does this work? So remember what we're doing. We're saying that I'm going into my ID page and I want to get some information from my ID. The way this is going to work is we're going to say something like this. I'm going to say let ID. I'm going to make a new variable called ID. That's going to equal to my request. Remember, I'm sending a request to the server, right? When I come from my contact list page, when I click on the edit button, it sends a request to the server. The request for the server is going to have some parameters, and I want to grab the ID from that. Where is the ID coming from? This, I've just labeled it right here. You can change the name of this to make it whatever you want. I just called it ID. You can make it Tom, as an example, or ABC. And then you put ABC down here. Whatever you put up here, it's got to be done the same here. That's all you're doing here. All right, params is the params object, and this is part of HTTP, so it's part of the request object. And the request object is the request object that is I'm tapping into right here. Okay, the request parameter. So I'm getting the ID from whatever I get in there. And now that I have the ID, what I can do is I can pass the ID, right, to the database. And the way that looks like is I'm going to say, hey, contacts, I want to find by ID, all right? And I want to pass in the ID to the database to find it. And I want to have two things. I'm going to have an error as an example. And I'm also going to have a contact to edit. That's what I'm going to call it, contact to edit, right? And I'm going to pass this information as a callback function, right? That's what I'm going to do. But I'm getting an error. And why is that? It's saying that, well, it's saying parameter contact edit declared, but it's never read. That's fine. And parameter contact edit implicitly has an any type. Why? Why is that happening? And error, it says this. And why? Well, let's take a look at the parameter list. So it says, I get an ID, which is of type any. My projection, that's an optional. That's any. My options, some kind of query options, that's an optional one as well. And then I have a callback, which is optional. So actually I have two more parameters that I'm not using, projection and options, and they're any. So what it's looking for is this, and then this. That's what it's looking for. Projections and options. Before I even get to this part, I'm passing in empty objects here, right? And then I'm getting here, and that's why I was getting that little error, right? Because that is what my find by ID needs. Now, in previous versions of my code, I never needed to use this. I never even knew that existed. Why? No code hinting, my friends, from TypeScript. Now we know that this is the case, and we can satisfy the parameter requirements exactly. Okay? So now that we know that, we can continue. We can say that, okay, well, if error, if I get an error, then what do I want to do with it? I want to console log it. Console error. I want to push out that error to the console and respond with an error, right? I want to stop production and call it a 500 error, right? Otherwise, what I want to do, right, is I want to res render. So this part right here, I'm going to grab this part. I want to res render my in my index. So again, I'm going to show the edit view here, show the edit view, and I'm going to pass into my index template. It's going to be edit. The page is going to be edit, but now I need some data, and my data is going to be actually is going to be my contact. My contact is going to be my contact to edit. Contact to edit, this one. Okay, that's the only thing that's different here. So what does this mean? So I'm using find by ID. This is like me doing it's like me doing, hey DB, I want to go to my contacts collection and I want to do a find, and I want to put in something that looks like this. I want to look at my ID. This is what this is like what I'm doing, and I want to find whatever that ID is. Okay, that's what I want to find, right? And that's what this does. So it kind of finds my ID, gets the object that I'm looking at, the contact that I'm looking for, and then it's stored in here in the contact to edit parameter. That's the document that I'm getting, returns the document, and then I'm taking that document that I found. If I don't have an error, I'm going to take that document and pass it into the page right here. All right, so cool. So what this should do is when I go to my edit page now, this is complete. When I go to my edit page, I should be able to see the object that I'm editing. Okay, let's see if I can do that. So I'm going to go back to my page, right? I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to click edit, and we're good. We're getting the page that I want to edit in here. It looks like it's an edit page, and we're all good to go. Okay. All right, so that's the one thing we're doing. That's fantastic. That's excellent. And let's continue. So that's the first part. So this edit is displaying edit. Now how do I actually process the edit page? Okay, now that's more tricky. So what that looks like is something different. Okay, so I'm going to still do this res redirect, but not yet. I'm going to get my ID again. So I'm going to say let ID equals to request.params.id. I'm going to still do the same thing because I need reference to it. But this time I want to instantiate a new contact. That's what I want to do. Where am I getting that? Remember, I have a contact object. So I'm going to say that let an updated contact, that's the new updated contact I want to make, that's going to equal to well, I wanted to use a contact, right? And what I want to do with the contact is something that looks like this. But when I do this, it gives me a bit of an error. It says, are you sure you're not missing a new keyword? And that's what I'm missing. I need a new contact. And the new contact that I'm going to have in there is going to have an ID, which is the current ID. I'm recreating the contact, in other words. I'm going to make my full name, and this is where we're going to get my full name from, request.body.fullname. So that is where it's coming from. Full name is remember the name value in my EJS file. So in my edit form, right, I have this name value. Like I said before, this name value, again, just to reiterate, is inside the request body. It's going to be sent in here, right? And then I'm going to go full name, contact number, right? Request.body.contact number, right? And then finally, email address, which is request.body.email address. And that's it. So that is my new contact, right? And that new contact, I'm going to use this again when I make an ad. It's going to be almost similar to this. But now I need to actually do the edit. How do I do the edit? I'm going to use the contact object again. I'm going to say, hey, contact object. I want to update one. That is the thing I want to use. And I'm going to say that I want to search for, this is my filter, I'm going to search for the ID that matches my ID. That's the one I want. I'm searching for that ID. And what I want to do here is I want to pass in the updated contact, my updated contact, and some additional options. Look where it says here, options. I don't have any options. I'm passing in an empty object. And then I want to do a callback. So my callback function is going to be my function, which is going to be an error. Or I can code it like we did earlier with without this part. But let's just use this for now, and we'll update, we'll modernize later. So how does this work? Well, we're going to code error, if error, console error, la la, which means I'm going to do the same thing I've done up here, this part. And I'm going to do that in here. And I can turn this into a fat arrow function because that's okay. That's modern. And then after I'm done, I'm going to do the res redirect, this part. So where does the actual editing happen? Right here. Once I do update 1, I pass in the thing I want to update. I'm good. The error, the callback, this part here is optional, this whole part, right? I'm just going to res redirect after I'm done. As soon as I'm done updating, I'm redirecting. Okay, that's how it works. So that is my edit, and it should work now. Let's see if this totally works, just the way I've coded it here. So this is my processing of the edit page. Okay, going back, right? I refresh, and I want to edit Peter Parker's number. So it says instead of 550, it's 51. Okay, so edit. I got Peter Parker. I'm putting in 1, clicking the edit button, and oh man, what happened? It didn't do it, right? Did I get an error? Like, you know, that's the thing that we have to check now. Okay, so going back to the code, let's check and see what we have from a node perspective. Did we get an error, right? And well, no, right? We got our contact list, right? That's what we did. And we did our post request, right? This is our post request, right? And we wanted to do our post request here. Here's our post request. So what happened? Like, I did the error. I made a new contact. I got the information from my request.body.fullname, request.body. Oh man. Oh, look, what the heck? Right? I spelled this wrong. And that's how typical it is. There's no code hinting on the body object, right? Because the body object is something that you submit. So make sure you're clear there. Let's add a save, you know, do that there as well. Okay, so now that we've done that, now that we've done this as an example, there it is, it's rebooted. And let's go back to this and try it again. So refresh, go back to this, edit, and let's change this to 551. When I click edit now, we're good. Edit is done. Let's put this up on GitHub. So that's the update. Okay, so this part. So let's go into my command prompt and we'll say git add dot, git commit -m, added update capability on contact list. By the way, guys, this is satisfying. If you follow this in-class exercise, it'll satisfy your requirements for your lab 4. A lot of them. That's what I'm helping you do. I'm helping you build out lab 4 if you follow these things. For people that are not following this thing for whatever reason, they're going to have a hell of a time. I'm sorry to say it that way, but there's no other way I can say it that's easy. They're going to have a heck of a time trying to figure out how to do lab 4, right? So that's why I'm hoping that you guys are following the in-class exercise here. All right, so this is this. So this is the, again, the GET request. This is the post request for my edit. Well, let's take care of my add now. All right, well, how does the add look? Well, we've already built our page, so it's pretty simple. We're going to go here. This is correct, actually, right? So we're going to go in, but what we need to do is pass in our data. There is no data for add, but it needs it because our page, our edit.ejs page, requires a contact. It requires a contact that we're not giving it anymore, right? So which means if I don't have a contact here, it's going to be here check again, Andre. I think they should be pushed by this point. You don't see the changes that are pushed. Hold on a second. Before we continue, let's go and check that out. GitHub, Durham, right here. That's where the changes are pushed, right here. It should say, you know, added functionality, right? So routes. Oh, I didn't. Let's do that. Sorry, I didn't push the changes. You're right. Git push. There we go. And now they should work. No problem. All right, so that is, sorry, so that was so I need the contact is what I'm saying there. So if I go back to my index.ts, then what I need to do is in here, I need to pass in the contact, just like we have up here, where we pass in contact to edit. Well, there is no contact to add yet, but I want to pass in a contact in here. So I'm going to say, it doesn't matter which order, by the way. I'm going to say contact, and my contact is going to be empty. I just need to pass in something, right? That has the contact object just has to be empty here. Now that I have this, I should be able to go to my add page, no problem. Let's see how that looks. So again, going back to this, if I click add, I get to this. But this doesn't work right now. Cancel works, right? But my add doesn't. But notice that it changed. To change this, it detected that I'm in the add page, and it swapped out my button for the add button. That's all good, right? But I didn't do the add part, the processing part. Let's do the process now. This is the other part that we have to do. Well, the add process is actually very similar to what we did with up here, to the edit. So I'm going to grab this piece right here, right? We don't have an ID though. I'm going to grab this part. And in my add, right, I want to still instantiate a new object. So I'm going to still do my redirect in a second. So I'm going to still instantiate a new object, right? But it's going to be called a new contact. I'm not going to have an ID. It's going to generate it for me. So I'm just need this part. So new contact is equal to this. Very similar, right? Why can I get full request.body to full name and all this stuff again? Well, because in my edit page, when I add a contact, I'm going to still have these fields, right? It's just that I'm going to get the value from the user this time. The user is going to edit the value. All right, that's what they're going to do in here. All right, so that's pretty cool. So I need this part. This is correct. But what about what about the mechanism to do the add? So this part, right, this update one, by the way, previous, just to match it, it's like db.contacts.update, you know, as an example. We're searching for the ID of type ID, right? And then we're updating, and then update, right? Whatever the fields you want to update, we're updating everything else. That's what this is doing, right? Well, the add is very similar. I want to do like an insertion, right? So it's going to be similar. I'm going to say that, but in our case, it's going to be called create. So contact.create. It needs the new contact. That's the thing I want to create, and a callback function if there's an error. All right. How does the error look? Identical to this part. In fact, I can just grab all this. It's identical, my friends. And that's why we don't make multiple pages for this. We don't need this anymore, right? And that's the add. So the add is super simple once we have the edit. The add looks like this: full name, contact number, email address. We do a create, and that's similar to a db.contacts.insert, and then we do a whatever the contact data is here, right? That's what it's similar like on the database side. So we do a contact.create. Okay, cool, excellent. Let's see if this works. So go back to here, refresh the page, go here, and I'm going to add, well, let's see what we have first of all. What do we have? We have Peter Parker, Tony Stark, and Bruce Banner. Well, let's add me, and then I can delete me. So I'll say Tom. You can add yourself. Try it out. and click add, and there I am, the last person on the list. By the way, notice that it adds in order. Whatever the last person is the order that is last name. I'm not sorting by full name or anything else. There's no sorting features right now. How would I sort? Well, I can do that on the router side. Before I pass the data in here, I can do some kind of sorting mechanism, right? I can sort by full name or whatever. And here's something else. If I have a button or something like that that's going to make me sort, I can do it in two ways. I can sort on the front end, where I can actually sort everything, or I can sort on the back end. Front end is easier. All right, so how do I do this? So here's my stuff. I want to delete. Deletion doesn't work right now. Deletion doesn't even go anywhere. Look, it's like, don't know what you're talking about. There is no deletion, right? Delete actually just goes back, right? So let's take a look at my contact list for a second and see what happens. So this is what it does. Delete just sends you back, right? But we want to do a delete, but let's push up the adds because add works. So we're going to say again, git add dot git commit -m added create capabilities to contact list. The only thing we're missing now is deletion. Okay, that's what we're missing. So how do we delete? Well, that's like super simple, like really simple, right? If we can do edit, then we're going to use this very similar way to deleting, right? So just like we did before with this, we're going to say that, hey, let's get our ID. So again, it's equal to request.params.id. That ID, first we're going to get the ID, and we're going to delete by ID. So we're going to say, hey, let's get our contact. Hey, contact, let's remove, that's the command, the object that matches the ID that we got there. That's it. Remove that ID. And if there's an error, well, let's do that whole error callback thing. That's it. I mean, it's that easy. It's pretty simple to do a deletion. So what this looks like is, I'll just grab this, delete this for a second. I'll just grab all this part in here and put that in there. Okay, and that is deletion. And this, how that works, is very similar to in the database. When we delete a contact, I didn't show you this, but it's contacts.remove, right? db.contacts.remove, and we're going to kind of search by the ID in this case, which matches the ID, whatever that is, and then remove the contact. That's all it does. Now, one thing is, removal is unforgiving. Just like we saw in the database side, if I remove, it's gone, and there's nothing to help us, right, to stop this from happening. So if I save this, and if I go back to the front end here, and if I click delete on my name, then boom, it's gone, right? We don't want this. We want the front end to save us with this kind of stuff, right? So in order for us to get that code hinting back to say, hey, are you sure? We need to enable deletion on the front end again. All right, so how does that work? Let's go back into my app.ts, and this is inside of my scripts folder on the client side. So client app.ts in here, which is this. And notice that I commented the contact list completely out. And there is a bit of deletion code in our button delete in here. There is no button, it's an anchor tag, but we can lift this code out here. So this code, and lift it out. And we'll put this up here underneath the auth guard. So an actual code. So it can't be button delete, it's going to be anchor tag delete. Delete is the class that I made last time with you guys. Okay. It can't do a if are you sure, then remove it. It can't do this. It's got to say, if you're not sure, if I'm not sure, then I want to just redirect, right? That's what I'm doing here. If I'm not sure, redirect back to the contact list. Otherwise, go ahead and delete. That's what it's going to be like. So it's kind of the same thing, but a little opposite. One thing we have to do is, we have to note that is, it's going to delete no matter what I do here. Unless I prevent default behavior. The click event is now a submit. So if I don't put prevent default behavior in here, it's going to delete it whether I like it or not. So I need to put in a little event in here, and it's going to say event.prevent default. I need to stop this from happening, because if I don't prevent default behavior, because now my form is a submission form, it's going to do a post request, and the post request is going to complete the deletion. I don't want that to happen, so I need to do it this way. Now I can clean up all of this code inside of my edit. Okay, so this is that. And that's not enough. That's one part. My display edit, I can also put that back into play. This is all on the front end now, right? But I don't care about any of this stuff at all other than the form validation. So really, my edit is just form validation now. That's my edit, my display edit, if I'm going to use the display edit at all. Okay? I'm just going to show you this because this is what we would need. So display edit, which isn't being called yet, it just does form validation. Okay? Login button we still need because we're mocking it up. Later on, we're going to delete this too. All right, display contact list does off-guard and does my deletion. So this is confirm deletion. This is going to stay for our entire time. We're not going to remove this ever. This part's going to go, okay? But the rest is going to stay. All right, so that is the front end stuff. How does this work? Let's go back and make sure that it all works. So this is, what is this part? This is the display login. We can clean up some of this, right? And yep, on success, then submit the form, and the form is actually a form. Good. And we don't need any of this, so I'm just cleaning up as we go. And all of this toggle login, bye-bye. I don't need any of this stuff anymore. That was a dreaded toggle login function that I couldn't stand, but we had to use it at the time, right? And display 404, we don't need that, but we'll leave it for now. And go in there, and we don't need all this. And we need the page ID because that's how we're swapping stuff, but I'm not going to do home, about, services, projects at all. But I am going to put in a case that is for edit, because we need that edit page to have some code hinting, right? So we're going to say display edit, or code hinting would be like page validation. Display edit. That is going to be in place. Display contact is going to be in place. Display contact list is going to be in place. All those things are going to still work. And now our front end function is a little bit smaller again. We notice we keep on chopping away at it, right? Because we're doing a lot in the back end, which makes sense. Some of the front end, we're going to do front end validation. We can also do back end validation too. All right, so that is the only thing that's left. Okay, cool. So that is our front end. And again, all we did was for that we changed was in a display contact list, we added this little check. Okay, let's put this back into play. We're going to refresh. And I want to add a new contact. Let's add me back in. And let's see if I can delete myself again. Right, so I'll click add. This all worked before. And if I click delete, now it says, are you sure? If I click cancel, it doesn't delete. If I click delete and I press OK, then it's gone. Now we have a functionality we had back in place, but now it's actually working as it should. That's fantastic. Now we have full CRUD, and that's the end of today, guys. Let me just put this up on GitHub. So I'll do a git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added delete capabilities to the contact list. Git push. And that is full CRUD for today. So we're not going to put this up on Heroku today. We're going to wait till next week. And the reason for this is because we have to create our, we're going to have to go up on MongoDB Atlas, and we already have an account. So next week when we get together, we're going to go up put our site, the first thing we're going to do, put our site up the way it is, and then we're going to talk authentication. So next week is all about authentication. And once we get authentication working, we're golden. We're going to use something called Passport, which is another module that helps us do authentication. But this week, all of our create, read, update, and delete pieces are done. And this gives us mostly everything you need for your lab 4. All right, any questions from anybody here? All right, guys, thank you so much then. That's it for today. I'll see you guys next week. For in-class exercise that we're doing this week, make sure you can show the create, read, update, delete in a couple of screenshots. All right, thanks, guys. Take care. Thanks, Andre.